All right. Good morning. Let's try that again, okay? Good morning. Good morning. Yes, indeed. All right. We are in the last and final week of Real Talk. This is the part where you all go, oh, we're done talking about sex and relationships? Please. Yes, this week is not too bad, I promise. The worst of it was the first 2 weeks of this series, and now it's not as awkward. But we do hate awkward stuff in church, right? Because you're kind of stuck, and it's like you're supposed to be quiet and listen to the pastor when he's talking, and so you can't like be rude, although some of you are sometimes, but you're not supposed to be, so you kind of have to sit there and take it, which I fully take advantage of sometimes when we got to talk about the rough stuff, but I'm excited that we get to talk about stuff like this because it's really important for you and for the person you partner up with someday. So we're going to talk about the last and final aspect of what healthy relationships should look like, especially as it pertains to finding a significant other. Let's talk about expectations for a minute. How many of you guys, you have different expectations for the person that you want to be with someday? How many of you've like written in a journal, my future husband will have dark hair, tall, handsome, athletic, can sing like an angel. Like you have like a list of things you're looking for in somebody? It's okay, don't be shy. How many of you have this? Or have at least thought through it? Okay. How does it measure up? Yours is in the room.
Different.
Oh, different, but that's okay. See, that's a good point right there. She compromised. Sorry, Jared. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's good. It's good to have some expectations. It's good to also be flexible with those expectations when need be. It's good to know what expectations should not be flexible. Okay, how many of you, maybe you don't have expectations for the person you want to be with, but there are expectations put on you for the type of person you should be for the person that you want to be with someday? Okay, more hands. That's good. Okay. How many of you, those expectations, I mean, they come from a variety of places, right? They come from, how many of you, your parents, they tell you what your expectations should be? How about from the Bible? You should raise your hand. Or maybe TV, social media. There's lots of examples. Like, my favorite thing, that's not really my favorite thing, but my favorite thing is like the way Disney portrays it, right? There's always like this beautiful romantic, like it's just picture perfect, once upon a time, and there's always like three elements, right? There's people start dating or spending lots of time together, unless it's Frozen 1 and she just like sings a song with the dude. She's like, let's get married, right? Like, and then in which case that's not a good example, but they start spending time with each other, or they start dating, or whatever you want to call it. They fall in love, and then they all live happily ever after, right? And that's basically every love story in every Disney movie ever, right? You know, you go through the whole list: Little Mermaid, Aladdin. Of course, I'm drawing a blank on the spot. Tangled. What else is there? Cinderella. Yes, that's a good one. Beauty and the Beast. There's the chase, the dating, the spending time together, the figuring out how each other feels about each other. And then there's the falling in love. And then there's the living happily ever after portion, riding off into the sunset, sometimes in a pumpkin, right? And what? Shrek. It's not Disney, but that's probably the best one. You know, Shrek is by DreamWorks, and it just rips on Disney the whole time. Have you guys noticed this? Go back and watch it now, and it's all the Disney characters are the slaves being sold off by Lord Farquaad, and it's great. Anyway, there's some other things in Shrek that I didn't notice as a kid, but we're not going to get into that right now. I just recently watched it with my kid, and I was like, yeah, I didn't notice that when I was his age. Of course, I wasn't his age when it came out, but anyway, besides the point, there's expectations out there. There's like a picture-perfect way to get with somebody, to live happily ever after. And I'm just going to take that little pretty balloon, heart-shaped balloon, I'm just going to pop that for a second, because that's not actually reality. That's not how it works. Hopefully you know that. And some of us, to some degree, we know that that's not how it works, but we still kind of maintain those expectations sometimes, that it's just going to work out perfect and it's going to be great. But life isn't really that way, and neither are relationships. Maybe you've seen this picture perfect thing happen, though, with the people in your lives. You've seen at least a version of this. Maybe your grandparents have been married for a really long time, and you have them as an example. Or maybe you see a different example from like maybe an older sibling who is dating or who's gotten married. Or maybe you have a small group leader who might be engaged, right? Or you've seen examples like that. Or maybe you have friends who all seem interested in dating, and they have their expectations and ideas of what it should look like and who you should be with and who you should not be with and that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of expectations, and they all tend to revolve around the idea of finding the one, right? Finding who you should spend the rest of your life with. But what if there's actually another option? What if you don't really want to be dating? What if you don't fit the mold that the rest of the world tells you should fit in, right? This is a question that is kind of like the unspoken question that is actually true for a lot of people. What if you don't want to be dating, right? If you're in middle school, this should be the majority of you, although I was in middle school once, I know it's not. But maybe you don't want to be dating right now, and maybe that's okay, right? Maybe you don't really want to date now, and maybe you don't ever want to date ever, because you are an introvert, and the idea of being with somebody else forever means you never get introvert time, and that scares you, right? Or maybe you just, that's a lot of responsibility. You don't want to worry about that. So the grass is always greener somewhere else, right? You'll find this as you get older, like single people always want to be like married or find somebody, and the married people are always like, I wish I were single again. Like sometimes, like, because there's grass is greener somewhere else. And sometimes you always want what you don't have. And so it's really important to kind of recognize there is other options. You could just not date. You could just be single. And our culture and Disney movies tend to look down on the idea of being single. They're like, what? You don't have somebody to complete you? What's wrong with you, right? But actually, if we read the Bible, and if actually we looked at the reason we're all here, in this place called Earth, that God created, actually, we find that relationships are a part of life. It's a pretty significant part of life. But it's not the point of life. Finding a significant other is not the point of life. It's a part of life. It's not a part of everybody's life. It doesn't have to be. But it's certainly not the point of life. So some of you might wonder, is it okay if I never date or get married? If I choose not to be in a relationship, will people think that something's wrong with me? Or what if nobody wants to be in a relationship with me? Is the entire point of life just to get married and have kids? Will God be disappointed if I don't do those things? Can God still use me for cool, amazing things if my life doesn't include dating and relationships? These are all questions that if you haven't started asking now, sometime you may start asking. You probably should start asking, because it's really good to ask all kinds of questions because they force you to go and find good answers. But maybe you found yourself asking these questions. Maybe you felt the pressure of like, man, sometimes schools are brutal because you're surrounded by a bunch of people your age that have a bunch of different ideas of what life should look like and the people you should be with. And so sometimes it's just really hard to like stand on your own 2 feet, be firm in what you believe without the influence of what other people have to say. And so we're going to get into actually what God says when it comes to relationships and dating and being single, and this whole question we're going to be looking at. So, but what we talk about in this whole series, which rings true especially in this, is that if we're followers of Jesus, if we've given our lives to Christ, then we know that Jesus changes everything. Knowing Jesus changes everything. Changes our perspective, changes our outlook, changes the way we see how relationships should work. Hashtag relationship goals. Knowing Jesus changes everything. It changes those goals. And so we're going to be looking at a passage of Scripture called the Sermon on the Mount. We've talked about this a few times. How many of you know what the Sermon on the Mount was? Okay, how many of you at least heard the phrase, the Sermon on the Mount? Right? This was the part of Jesus' ministry where he gave a sermon on a mountainside. That's all it is. It's like 3 chapters long where he gives a sermon in Matthew. And so Matthew obviously wrote it down, one of Jesus' disciples, ex-tax collector, become follower of Jesus. And this is what he says at one point in Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 14. He says, "You're here to be a light, bringing out the God colors in the world. God is not a secret to be kept. We're going public with this, as public as a city on a hill. If I make you light bearers, you don't think I'm going to hide you under a bucket, do you? I'm putting you on a light stand. Now that I've put you there on a hilltop, on a light stand, shine. Keep open house. Be generous with your lives. By opening up to others, you'll prompt people to open up to God, this generous Father in heaven." So, you guys ever heard the song growing up? Like, "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine." And then what's the second verse? "Hide it under a bushel." No! "I'm gonna let it shine. Hide it under a bushel." No! "I'm gonna let it." Some of you just jumped out of your seats more the second time than the first time. You guys know the song, right? So if you never heard it, then you should, YouTube it or something. I don't know. There's like modern versions of it with auto-tune and fun stuff, and it's not the same song. We're getting off track. But you know the point. It's not to hide it under a bucket or under a bushel, or you're supposed to let it shine. Bye. I scared them off. All right, so we're going to let it shine, and maybe that's what they're going to do right now. They're like, "I've got to let it shine." No more listening to Zach. I've heard enough. But this is the point that Jesus says. So let's try a little activity here. Okay, Corbin, can we cut the lights here for a second? And how many of you have a phone? Okay, I want you to take your phone, those of you who have it, and I want you to hit that little button that says flashlight. There you go. Look how bright this room gets. Okay, everybody hide it real quick. Don't turn it off, but hide it. And on the count of 3, everybody let it shine. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. All right. You can turn the lights on. I love that moment in concerts where everybody's just listening to the music and they've got the lights shining. That happens at CIY sometimes. It's great. But when one person shines a light in a dark space, it illuminates the whole thing, because as John says in his gospel, right, darkness cannot overcome light. Darkness is simply the absence of light. One little light will illuminate the entire darkness. But a bunch of little lights will make it brighter than anything else, right? So, Jesus is saying, the point of us being here is to shine the light about who Jesus is, the good news, okay? Now, what does this have to do with dating, being single? But the only goal for our lives is not, remember, the point is not a relationship. That's a part of life, but it's not the point. The point is simple. It's to reflect who God is to the world around us. That's the point. That's the goal. That's our mission as Christians on earth. And if you'll notice, there's actually a lot of people in the Bible that go this route. And in fact, Paul, he's one of the apostles. He wrote a lot of the New Testament. We read from his letters a lot. He says, if you need to get married because it's better to get married than to burn with lust. But if you can, be like me. Be single, right? Because the reality is, when you're married, when you have a family you're caring for, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with it. You're not just responsible for yourself. You're mandated by God to take care of your family. And that takes a lot of your brain energy. That takes a lot of your time. It takes a lot of your anxiety, to be honest. And it's great. But in a way, they kind of always come first before other things in life. And so he's saying, hey, if you're like me, you get to travel around and see different people, talk to different churches. You get to work on your own schedule. And being single is a gift, is what Paul says, because you're able to do so much more in a lot of different ways that someone who's married and has a family can't do, right? There are strengths on both sides. Not one is better than the other. And so, real talk, you can choose to be single. And you're not less than in any way because of it. Okay? Some examples of people who were single in the Bible that did amazing things. Jesus, right, would be the obvious one. He was the Son of God, came to save all of humanity. He changed the most people's lives. Single. Okay? John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin. He was a prophet who came to prepare the way for Jesus, tell a lot of people that Jesus was coming. Single. Mother Teresa, not in the Bible, but she devoted her whole life to serving the poor. She changed a lot of people's lives. Single. Okay? Paul, like I just talked about, one of the most influential and famous teachers in the Bible. Single. Right? God can use single people to do incredible things. Okay? Your bandwidth, your capacity for other relationships are going to be significantly larger than people who are married and have families. Okay? And that's not really a bad thing. In other words, choosing to be single gives you way more flexibility to be able to carry out the things that God has instilled in your heart to be passionate about, to do for His kingdom. Right? You could have a significant impact on the world by choosing to be single. So when the world around you says you're incomplete without somebody to complete you, when the world says you're not anybody without somebody, when the world says that the only reason you would be single is because nobody wants you, when the world tells you lies, the truth is that God has a significant and special plan for your life, and it can include you being single. It can include you dating. It can include you being married someday. But it is not defined by who you are or are not with. So I'm freeing you from that pressure to find the perfect somebody. The reality is, you're probably, most of you, going to spend the next 6 to 10 years at a minimum not being married. Okay? Which means sooner or later you're going to have to figure out what it looks like to be a single person who's a follower of Jesus. Right? Some of you may get married and your spouse may die someday. And you're going to have to learn how to be single again. Some of you, you're going to go through things in life where you are dating somebody and you think that you're going to get married, and then it falls apart at the last minute. And you're going to have to pick up the pieces and figure out what it means to follow Jesus as a single person. Life is hard sometimes, okay? But you are not any less of a person based on your relational status, okay? I know none of you have Facebook, but the single checkbox is not a bad one, right? So, God can use people who choose to be single. And the real talk for today is that you can choose to be single. And so if I were to just leave you with 3 things to think about as we wrap up this series, with probably the life stage that most of you are going to be in for the foreseeable future, how can you see this in a way that honors Jesus? One, just knowing that you can choose to be single, okay? This, I've said it several times already, but this is an option for you. Think about this. You can choose to be single. And there's not anything wrong with that at all. Secondly, you can have a better outlook if you choose to date, right? If you're comfortable being single, then you're probably going to have better standards for when you do decide to date somebody. You're probably going to think it through a little bit better. It's not just going to be oh, well, they like me. I kind of like them. They're cute. I could see us being together, and you're flattered because they like you. Just because you have a crush on somebody or they like you back doesn't mean you have to date. It doesn't mean you have to get together. It doesn't mean you have to intertwine your lives in a way that you're not ready for yet. So you can choose to be single. You can choose to have a better outlook on if you choose to date. And third, you can celebrate what other people choose. Okay? People around you are going to date. People around you are going to choose to be single. People around you are eventually going to get married. You can choose to celebrate those things and not allow it to come between you and your friendship, right? I mean, it's okay to see what somebody else has and think, oh, I kind of wish I had that sometimes. But you don't have to let that come between your relationship with them. You don't have to let jealousy consume you, right? You can celebrate what other people choose. Because the reality is, as we talked about today, you can choose to date, you can choose to get married, you can choose to be single, and God will still use you if you put Him first. Because our goal is to shine the light to others about who Jesus is and the way that He impacts our lives. That's first. Secondly, is the second most important relationship in your life is your family, who you decide to marry someday, that kind of stuff. All that follows, though, after the first and most important decision, which is Jesus. If you choose to follow Him and make Him first priority, then there is no wrong choice after that. Okay? You can date, you can get married, you can be single, whatever. As long as Jesus is number one in your life and you're following His word and you're following what He says and has called for you to do. So, as you get ready to go to your groups, what's one way you can reflect the image of God to the world around you? What's a way that you can reflect the image of God to the world around you? I want you to think about that. I want to pray, and then we'll be dismissed.